Let me begin by first introducing the distinguished moderator and panelists for today. So our moderator for today is Dr. Eric Steinhardt. He teaches at William Patterson University and received his bachelor's in computer science from the Pennsylvania State University and PhD in philosophy from Stony Brooks. Professor Gale is the professor of radiation oncology and associate dean at the Graduate School at Northwestern University. She received her PhD in medical sciences from the University of Toledo and did her postdoctoral training at Mayo Clinic. We also have Mr. Denny Hall joining us from the Soka Gakkai International. He is the Director of Public Affairs at the SGI International, United States of America. We also have Professor Frank von Hippel. He's a nuclear physicist, a professor of public and international affairs emeritus at the Princeton University's program on science and global security, which he also co-founded. We also have Mrs. Lynette Taroke. She is the institutional strengthening advisor at African Council for Religious Leaders at Religions for Peace. I now hand over the floor to Dr. Steinhardt to kickstart the discussion for today, and looking forward to a riveting, intellectually stimulating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Professor Steinhardt, and we should just get going with all our speakers. And I'll remind everyone that there's always a lot to say and never enough time. And so at around 10 minutes, I'm going to jump in and say, okay, we need to wrap it up so that we can get on to the next speaker, and then have obviously time left for the discussion of the questions, which is, often some of the most interesting things, and to have discussion from audience members as well. So we'll start off with Professor Frank von Hippel.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, good.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about, I've added activism and nuclear disarmament to the agenda here. And the role, let me just adjust. I want to set the stage by just saying what we all know, that nuclear weapons are indiscriminate weapons of mass destruction. We saw that with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those events shocked the conscience of mankind. And we have been having a debate ever since. The first to join in the debate and to try to explain the dangers were the nuclear scientists who had been involved in making these weapons. And they were afraid of what would happen and what did happen, which is nuclear arms race between the US and the Soviet Union. The public was at first triumphalist about the way the US had ended the World War II with these two nuclear explosions. John Hersey sobered us up with his book, Hiroshima, which communicated the horror of those events through the eyes of a few of the survivors of Hiroshima. The religious figures have played a major role. Albert Schweitzer, who was at the time the fourth most admired man in the world, campaigned against nuclear weapons toward the end of his life. I've been involved in for 40 years in an effort led by Reverend Bob Moore of Princeton, where we have we try to educate our Congress people. But since the end of the Cold War, the nuclear danger hasn't been much of a public issue. I think it's starting to be of increasing concern. But the danger has been with us all along. And today, and all along in the form of false alarms, today we have a confrontation of, we're trying to avoid going to war with Russia, and we have a confrontation with China over another nuclear armed country over Taiwan. So just briefly, some pictures. This shows the iconic scientist Albert Einstein as the honorary chairman of an effort by some of the scientists who were involved in the nuclear bomb project, which was motivated originally by a fear that the Nazis would get nuclear bombs. And they were trying to raise $1 million to educate the public. This is Linus Pauling demonstrating in front of the White House. He organized the scientists to talk about the danger of the atmospheric fallout from radioactive fallout from atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. The best estimates is that atmospheric fallout killed 1 million people by cancer. He actually, this picture of him demonstrating, he had been invited with all the other US Nobel Prizers to have a dinner with President Kennedy, so he decided to demonstrate before he went in for the dinner. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in the following year, his efforts to stop testing. A treaty banning testing in the atmosphere was agreed to the following year. We've had activists, religious activists, including Direct Action by a group that calls themselves Plowshares. This group went through the fence around a facility where nuclear weapon components are manufactured in Tennessee, and they were arrested for their trespassing, and I think the nun spent a couple of years in jail. We have had mass movements periodically. There was one about atmospheric nuclear testing. This was the most recent one in 1982, when there was real concern about the Reagan administration was going to get us into a nuclear war. This was an uprising. It's an interesting picture. It shows you how broad the uprising was nationally, and this is a group of Vermonters in a 1 million-person demonstration in New York. And they're saying that 177 out of the 195 towns in Vermont voted to freeze the nuclear arms race. Now, just to walk you through quickly through how indiscriminate nuclear weapons are, this shows you a map of Hiroshima after the bomb, and you can see out to more than a mile there was nothing but rubble. And about 100,000 people were killed. It was a town about the size of New Orleans. So people wonder what would happen to a U.S. Town or city, and so they set up a house in the Nevada test site and set up a nuclear explosion about the size of the Hiroshima explosion about a mile away. You can see first comes the heat, starting this suburban house, lighting it on fire, and then comes the blast wave and blows it to pieces. So obviously, we are just as vulnerable. Of course, nuclear weapons have become much more powerful since Hiroshima. This is a picture of the destruction that one Russian warhead, if it was aimed at the Pentagon, would destroy basically everything inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway. There's also fallout. There was not fallout at Hiroshima or Nagasaki because the explosions were high enough in the atmosphere so they didn't contact the ground and suck up dirt to mix with the radioactivity and so and bring it down to Earth, and so the radioactivity sort of drifted off. But for targets which so-called hard targets, which require explosions close to the ground in the nuclear war fighting, you would have these huge plumes, including into adjoining countries. There's been concern in recent years about the climate effects of nuclear weapons. This is the simulation where the 400, equivalent of 400 million ton explosives, million tons of chemical explosive equivalents on cities, creating about 100 million tons of soot which rising into the stratosphere and blocking the sun and changing the global climate for a period with a 7-year half-life. And you can see here in the before picture, climate picture, the purple is confined to is the climate in Antarctica and Greenland, and then afterwards you can see much of the northern hemisphere, sort of with the Antarctic kind of climate, and which is of course you couldn't grow much in that climate. So in summary, it would be unimaginably bad. It's almost happened several times. We can't go on this way. And a group of us have been trying to organize the American physicists to engage on this, but we have 650 people who are physicists who signed up to help educate Congress, but we obviously can't do it by ourselves. And then I just have added a couple of slides just to give you, for the discussion to come, give you an indication of where we are. You can see during the Cold War here, US plus Russian, Soviet nuclear warheads, we went up to 70,000. We're down to about 10,000 now. So we've gone down quite a bit, but I think we're not going down any further, and China is now coming up in a major way. So that, and 10,000 nuclear warheads can still destroy the civilization. And then finally, with regard to proliferation, which I noticed was in the title, this is the history of the increase in the number of nuclear weapon states. The 5 big powers, the so-called permanent members of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, pretty quickly, and then more slowly we've added other countries. The good news is very few countries have nuclear weapons that don't have nuclear weapons today, have nuclear weapons programs. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
So good. Thank you very much. Very informative. And let's move on to Dr. Gail Woloschak.
Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen. Yes.
Okay, great.
We
Ready to
can
go.
see you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to kind of carry on with some of the things that Frank just talked about, but perhaps from a slightly different perspective. I'm a radiation biologist, and one of my jobs is to go to places like Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and look at the biological consequences of such events. Well, One of the interesting things, this is actually a test explosion that was done after we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. This detonation was one of about 57 that the US did following dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One can ask, why did we need to do that many? And I believe that most people within the community have felt that this was just overkill. And what's especially bad about this event is that there were several done in the Marshall Islands. The people of the Marshall Islands to this day have not been allowed to return to their islands to live. The interesting things are, if you look at what happened at the kind of the dawn of the nuclear age, there was a New York Times journalist who watched the first test bomb go off, and he said, "And just that instant, there rose from the bowels of the earth a light not of this world, the light of many suns in one. One felt as though one were present at the moment of creation when God said, 'Let there be light.'" 100 seconds later, he described the explosion as the first cry of a newborn world. Jack Hubbard wrote later, and what is interesting is that the name of the first explosion was called Trinity. I mean, all of these theological reflections that were going into this atomic bomb, they said the event was the unlocking of nuclear energy that had been seen by some of us at the birth of a beautiful child, or having achieved a victory over ignorance, or some of us felt that we had been permitted to play on the harps of God. These kinds of allusions, I mean, they show the hubris actually of these scientists who were clearly involved. There were some people who actually made comments like, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. My God, it's beautiful," to which the person standing next to him replied, "No, it's terrible." And the physicist Weizskopf said, "Our first feeling was one of elation, then we realized we were tired, and then we worried." So there was almost a dichotomy between what the physicists thought and what the physicians who actually were dealing with some of the concerns that would happen as a consequence of the nuclear bomb, nuclear fallout felt. The physicians were very worried, yet many of the physicists who developed it were claiming that this was very godlike and was an act of creation. I've been to Hiroshima a number of times, and I met this man, Mitsuo Kodama, who is, he wrote this book, actually gave me an autographed copy of it, and he talks about his experience as a child at Hiroshima. He was in his school. He wandered through Hiroshima for about 4 or 5 days before he could find anyone to help him. He has had 6 cancers since the time of the explosion. So what were the consequences? There was death and destruction that happened at the moment. The US lied about the tragedy. Then we developed a treaty to study the consequences of the exposure. The Radiation Experimental Research Foundation is still in place in Hiroshima today. I go there often. There are people whose goal it is to study the consequences of the bomb. The immediate consequences were things like hair loss and vomiting and things like that that come from a high dose radiation exposure. But within the first few years, leukemia developed, then solid tumors started about 15 years later. And I will tell you now that right now, the study of that population is the most important population for determining human risks for cancer following radiation exposure. So we are following them, grandchildren, everybody to this day. But there is a feeling, if you look at the actual consequences, that these were biological consequences. And it becomes almost a form of biological warfare. It was not just about blowing up buildings and doing damage to property. It was, or even just the damage to the people who got hit by the bombs. It was actually warfare for miles and miles of destruction. And so there is, because it's so much like biological warfare, there's the idea that perhaps it should be forbidden and treated like biological warfare. UNSCEAR was formed in 1955. UNSCEAR is the UN Scientific Committee for the Effects of Atomic Radiation. And the member states that Frank put up before are members of UNSCEAR. I'm actually one of the US representatives to UNSCEAR. And our job is to continue to monitor any radiation accidents that happen, any radiation exposures, to keep doses on what people are exposed to, and to do studies of what those biologic effects have been. Now, I put this picture before you just to show you that there were real people affected. This was really a portrait photograph that was done of one of the survivors, Jimpi Teravama, who actually still retained the scar tissues for many years after. These were the skin consequences, not of the bomb dropping, but of the radiation exposure that followed after the bomb dropped. This is Nagasaki today, a view outside of my hotel room when I was there. But what is important is that both Hiroshima and Nagasaki have become main cities of peace who are totally opposed ever to having any nuclear bombs or nuclear weapons that are used. They advertise this, they can have rallies all the time for this, and it has become a very important part of their of the ethos of the nation for those two cities to become important. Now, certainly there are many anti-nuclear weapons movements, and I want to distinguish anti-nuclear weapons movements from anti-nuclear movements. There are many people that are opposed to the use of, say, nuclear power and other forms of use of nuclear. I don't think that that's necessarily what the message we should take from the use of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There are those that are specifically designed for weapons, and I believe that those are actually very good groups that have put forth a lot of reasonable ideas to try to fight some of these. Many of these are names that you will know, such as Greenpeace and Peace Action. There have been many religious stands that have been taken about nuclear war. Most have been opposed to nuclear weapons. Some accept having nuclear weapons as deterrents. So I've accumulated some of these here. I don't think I have enough time to read all of them, but I want to highlight a few of them because they're important. We can find it in the Lutheran Church. The Episcopalian Church has taken a strong stand on. Judaism has taken a stand again towards a process of nuclear reduction and disarmament. The Episcopalian Church explored the moratorium on the production of new nuclear arms. The World Council of Churches made the statement that the only ultimate protection is their total elimination. The World Parliament of Religions, and I actually participate in the World Parliament of Religions, was there a number of times and was involved in some of the discussion about nuclear weapons. They said the threat posed to humanity and all other forms of life by the sheer destructiveness of nuclear weapons presents an unacceptable risk for this and future generations. This unacceptable risk presents a moral imperative for the elimination of nuclear weapons. The Muslim Christian initiative has been very important. The conference on European churches has also been critical in this. The National Council of Churches made a stand. And then I need to talk about my own Orthodox church for just a moment here and say that you can find several places where the Orthodox Church has taken a strong stand. The most, probably the most recent is the quote that I have here, which was a social ethos document done by a large number of Orthodox scholars and distributed by the Patriarch Bartholomew of the Orthodox Church. But there have been many ones. But what has become important recently, and which has made its way into the news, has been the vision of and the photographs of many Orthodox priests in Russia actually blessing nuclear arms and blessing them, theoretically prior to their use. Honestly, very strongly, the Russian Orthodox hierarchs have taken a stand against that, have said it's wrong, have tried to stop them from doing that as much as they can control their priests. I think they're trying to do it, but it is a very dangerous situation. And as we know, I'm Ukrainian, and so I feel the danger at my back door on a nation that got rid of their nuclear weapons. Ukraine gave them up only to be threatened today. And with that, I'll make my final comment, which is, there's something, I think, maybe it's just sort of a message of hope, but what I've found, I've been involved in science-religion dialogue for many, many years. And what I find is that if we all sit down and we talk about what our religion teaches, we have disagreements and we argue and divisions come up. But sometimes when we talk about something outside ourselves, whether it's about science or environment, or even nuclear weapons, there's a lot of agreement. And you saw a lot of agreement in those faith traditions. We can use that strength in unity to be helpful on this particular issue. And I think we need to do it more than we are. With that, I'll end. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And let's move on to Ms. Lene Warimu. Is she here?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I feel as if I'm taking over from what Professor Gill was speaking about, because then for us, we work with religious leaders. We are based in Nairobi, Kenya, and what we are is a multi-religious organization, and we work with Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Baha'is, and we work with structures that are called National Interreligious Councils. So all these national interreligious councils in about 31 countries work together on different issues concerning their countries. So in terms of our topic today, we have Religions for Peace International, which is our mother organization, and this is still a conglomerate of faiths from different parts of the world. And at the point of Religions for Peace being formed in 1970, it was still at the height of the Cold War. So faith communities and faith leaders really saw the opportunity to get into the space of diplomacy and political discussions to ensure that we do not end up with a nuclear war. And of course, the different continents also over time realized that the potential for having nuclear war is also rife. So we have what are called nuclear weapons free zones in the different continents. For example, Africa, we have South America, we have Asia. So with this in mind, as the African Council of Religious Leaders, we did see an opportunity to be part of the banning nuclear weapons debate. And this is because religious leaders really are towards the sanctity of life, protection of the environment. And if you're going to put together science and religion, then they complement each other and they work together very well. So in just giving you sort of a brief of how also civil society organizations were able to pull together with faith leaders in the course of about 7 years that so the now treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons come into effect, we had discussions between non-nuclear weapon states and also civil society organizations for about 3 years. And these were called the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons conferences. And after each conference, we had action points or what the outcome of each conference was. And the final one, which was in Austria, so the process moved from civil society and sort of civil society-led discussions to now the United Nations. And around 2015 now, the United Nations did take over this discussion. We had what is an open-ended working group that was formed to address how would we have an international instrument that would address the total elimination of nuclear weapons. And you'll see that with progress in 2016, the UN also decided that it is now time to have the negotiations for this kind of an instrument. And this instrument was, there were negotiations in February and also around June, July of 2017. And the UN did adopt a treaty, which is called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So upon its adoption on 7th July, it was in September of the same year, and this treaty has now entered into force. It entered into force in January 2021. And why I'm speaking to this treaty is because as as faith leaders, as Religions for Peace, and as the African Council of Religious Leaders, and being part of a global movement called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, we see that this treaty is the pathway towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We do know that there is the NPT, but with the NPT, there is really no there's no article that provides for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. So our engagement with faith leaders is solely to ensure that the treaty is now universalized. And some of you may know that the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons did receive the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize for its work to drawing attention on the catastrophic consequences and also the attainment of this particular treaty. So the treaty does, in fact, have overall 3 main objectives. Definitely now nuclear weapons are illegal, and the aim is also to continue stigmatizing their possessions. It also seeks to build on existing norms of previous WMDs that have already been banned, chemical, biological weapons, and also to affirm the rights of people who've already been victimized. And this is really the Hibakusha based on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So our work in Africa, which may seem sort of far-fetched, and this was one of the challenges that we had as we started this campaign, but we were able to draw from the lessons of previous campaigns that we did on like-minded. We were not really part of the biological and chemical weapons, but cluster munitions and landmines were campaigns that religious leaders were really part of, having seen the scourge of such weapons in the different countries. And of course, the main one, which is the illegal proliferation of small arms and light weapons. So really our work was to try and correlate the impact of nuclear weapons vis-a-vis the impact of weapons that have already been banned and already have international instruments that expressly prohibit. So we have had religious leaders engage policymakers, and these policymakers have been at different levels. We have at the African Union level. We also have the regional economic communities. Africa is divided into East, West, South, Central. So we've had courtesy calls on the leadership of these particular regional groupings. And definitely at the national level, there's a lot of engagement with the relevant ministries of foreign affairs, speaking with parliamentarians. And we've had quite some efforts and also some successes in different countries. So I would say probably some of the challenges we've faced is priority. I think many African states, the fact that we are already nuclear weapons free zone and no country is looking towards manufacturing nuclear weapons or being, providing transit or any other way of supporting nuclear weapon states, there is that sort of, there's no priority or there's a bit of lack of interest. So it's for us to really push policymakers to push forward the treaty so that it goes through the bureaucratic processes and it is passed. And of course, there is also the element of expertise. Since, again, being a nuclear weapons free zone, there is not much move towards trying to figure out nuclear weapons. And what I would also call pressure from nuclear weapon states that may not want for the treaty to continue in the universalization process. So I think in terms of merging science and religion, it's important to ensure that we're able to correlate the particular problem that is within a particular context. What do the religious texts speak to that particular problem? And then having an opportunity to ensure that faith leaders and faith communities are also educated and understand that particular correlation. I think in many countries, there's still that element of trying, especially in Africa, there's still that element of trying to remove faith leaders from pure scripture to now, what can I call it, to seeing the interconnectedness with what there is currently in the world. I think the COVID pandemic has been very instrumental in bringing out the strength of religious leaders. We've seen faith leaders part and parcel of national task forces being asked for their advice, especially on the closure or opening of places of worship, which is also quite a controversial issue. You know, you would have to ensure that you gain the goodwill of faith leaders so that they would be able to talk to their members so that you're able to achieve. And at the same time, being a population that is 80% religious, then the best person to reach out to the people would be religious leaders. So I think it's imperative that we continue marrying science and religion and engaging religious leaders, whether it is on issues of environment, nuclear proliferation, socioeconomic governance. And I think this way we'll have better societies. I've tried to merge the questions that would have been part and parcel of the discussion and my presentation, and I hope to get more questions from the audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And let's move on to Mr. Daniel Hall.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Steinhardt, my fellow panelists, and Tufts University for organizing this conference. SGI President Daisaku Ikeda has enjoyed a long friendship with the university through Professor Emeritus Howard Hunter of the Department of Religion. So it's an honor for me to be here to represent SGI on this occasion. On the subject of how SGI has engaged with diplomatic processes on nuclear abolition, I can point to several examples, such as statements submitted by SGI representatives as civil society contributors to the conferences of the TPNW, the NPT, the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons conferences. Here in the United States, on behalf of SGI USA, I serve on the steering committee of the Back from the Brink campaign to help achieve a fundamental change in U.S. nuclear weapons policy that can pave the way for the U.S. to come into alignment with and join the TPNW. But today, I would like to focus on one particular contribution SGI has made to this discourse, which is through the annual proposals of SGI President Daisaku Ikeda, which he has written and submitted to the United Nations every year since 1983. Former UN Undersecretary General Ambassador Anwarul K. Chowdhury states in the foreword to a compilation of Ikeda's annual proposals titled A Forum for Peace that he, quote, knows of no one who has highlighted the role and responsibility of the world body so consistently, relentlessly, and substantively for such a long period of time. And as I will share in my talk, I believe this sense of relentless hope, responsibility, and effort is an expression of a universal humanism woven throughout Ikeda's proposals on nuclear abolition. In 2017, feminist peace educator and civil society activist Dr. Betty Reardon organized a two-part seminar series for Boston area university students using Ikeda's annual proposals as a guide for exploring nuclear abolition. According to the seminar purpose statement produced by Reardon, Ikeda's annual proposals, quote, illustrate two essential elements for effective civil action toward peace: a way of thinking that produces positive possibilities, coupled with concrete recommendations for civic action. She continues, quote, this way of thinking is one of the emerging alternatives to the present limiting forms of realism that stand in the way of seeking out and assessing constructive, creative solutions to myriad global problems that could lead us toward a just and sustainable peace. So today I'm going to share some examples of Ikeda's dual approach of suggesting both concrete actions and new ways of thinking for positive possibilities, drawing from his 2009 and 2022 proposals. I'll begin with concrete actions. In his 2009 nuclear abolition proposal, Building Global Solidarity Toward Nuclear Abolition, Ikeda calls, quote, for the world's people to clearly manifest their will for the outlawing of nuclear weapons and to establish the international norm that will serve as the foundation for a nuclear weapons convention, unquote. This action spoke to growing demand among global civil society to elevate the role of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. This demand would begin to take shape the following year at the 2010 NPT Review Conference, which concluded with 188 state parties adopting a consensus document, including language on the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. This was followed by conferences on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons throughout 2013 and 2014, the adoption of the TPNW in 2017, and its entry into force in 2021. Given these developments, Ikeda's 2022 proposal, which will be posted on daisakuikeda.org next Wednesday, February 16th, continues this approach by offering two new sets of concrete proposals for nuclear abolition given the realities of the present moment. His first set of proposals focus on steps to free the world from security doctrines that are dependent on nuclear weapons. For example, in response to the January 3rd statement from the leaders of the 5 declared nuclear weapon states, US, Russia, China, UK, and France, on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races, Ikeda calls on the UN Security Council to use this statement as the basis for a resolution urging the 5 nuclear weapon states to take concrete measures to fulfill their obligations to nuclear disarmament stipulated by Article 6 of the Treaty on the Nonproliferation of Nuclear Weapons. He also urges that language calling for a high-level meeting on the reduction of the role of nuclear weapons be agreed to and included in the final statement of the NPT Review Conference scheduled to be held this year, and that this high-level meeting invite participation of states possessing nuclear weapons outside of the NPT framework, thereby materially advancing progress on nuclear disarmament. He then points out that since Japan will host the G7 summit in 2023, he proposes that this high-level meeting on reducing the role of nuclear weapons be held concurrently in Hiroshima, in which the leaders of other non-G7 countries could also participate to engage in intensive deliberations on ways to further such concrete measures. Ikeda's second set of proposals pertain to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Here, Ikeda strongly calls on Japan and other nuclear-dependent states, together with the nuclear weapon states, to participate as observers in the first meeting of state parties to the TPNW, when it's held in Vienna in March. He also suggests that a commitment be made at this meeting to create a permanent secretariat for the purpose of ensuring fulfillment of the obligations and international cooperation stipulated in the TPNW. So as you see, I quickly shared a small sample of the concrete actions that comprise a core component of Ikeda's proposals from 2009 and 2022. However, complementing these concrete actions is Ikeda's elevation of the human dimension. He offers new modes of thinking and expresses his relentless conviction in human capacity for inner transformation and dialogue as a means to unleash the profound sense of hope, responsibility, and energy necessary to spread and deepen an ethos of universal humanism throughout society and abolish nuclear weapons. As Ikeda states, quote, if we are to put the era of nuclear terror behind us, we must struggle against the real enemy. That enemy is not nuclear weapons per se, nor is it the states that possess or develop it. The real enemy that we must confront is the ways of thinking that justify nuclear weapons, the readiness to annihilate others when they are seen as a threat or as a hindrance to the realization of our objectives. In the 2009 nuclear abolition proposal, Ikeda quotes British historian Arnold Toynbee, who in his book, A Study of History, addresses the nuclear weapons issue as a challenge which we cannot evade, and who states during his dialogue with Ikeda from 1972 through 73 that a self-imposed veto on the possession of nuclear weapons must be adopted by the world's governments. And the emotional resistance to this revolutionary break with ingrained habits and to this painful renunciation of familiar institutions will have to be overcome by self-education. In the atomic age, it cannot be broken with force. The Gordian knot has to be untied by patient fingers instead of being cut by the sword. Ikeda then delves into some lessons of history that might shine a light on Toynbee's concept of self-education as being key. He first looks at scientists. He reminds us that although we have become numb to the existence of nuclear weapons, we need to remember that many of the scientists involved in their development did not welcome their arrival, expressing deep concerns and misgivings. For example, in December 1938, the year before the outbreak of World War II, Otto Hahn discovered nuclear fission of uranium in his Berlin laboratory. Realizing the horrendous possibilities, Hahn is said to have considered throwing all his uranium into the ocean and committing suicide. In the following year, 1939, Leo Szilard proved that a chain reaction of nuclear fission, a key next step to producing an atomic bomb, was possible. He also foresaw tragedy, later declaring, "I knew the world was headed for sorrow." In 1942, scientists at the University of Chicago produced the first controlled nuclear chain reaction in a nuclear pilot, importantly advancing the Manhattan Project. And it was scientists involved in that work at the University of Chicago who drafted a petition urging President Harry Truman not to use the atomic bomb against Japanese cities, even as the final preparations for the first atomic bomb test were underway in July 1945. Ikeda then reminds us of the various responses of political leaders to the crises that have arisen during the nuclear age and the important lessons about the human dimension that can be derived from their experiences and leadership. For example, he shares that what is remarkable about the attitude of US President John Kennedy following the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was that he emphasized the importance of overcoming hostility and discrimination as the prerequisite to exploring possibilities of peaceful coexistence with the Soviet Union. Ikeda quotes Kennedy's famous speech, A Strategy of Peace, in June 1963, where he referred to the Soviets' allegations against the United States as follows, quote, "Yet it is sad to read the Soviet statements, to realize the extent of the gulf between us, but it is also a warning to the American people not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets, not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats." Ikeda believes that we must learn from his message, not to let our eyes become clouded by prejudice and preconceptions if we are to untie the Gordian knot of the nuclear age. He then goes on to describe the meeting between Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and US President Ronald Reagan at Reykjavik, Iceland in October 1986. Although they failed to attain their ultimate objectives, Ikeda believes that it represents a striking example of the importance of maintaining.
Mr. Hall, we're going to have to ask you to conclude very quickly.
Sure. The main point of that was he was inspired by their spirit of dialogue in those negotiations. And he thought there were three particular points that he wanted to share about that.
Let's just maybe end so we can move on to the others. And,
sure.
And if there's just one sentence that you might sum up.
Well, if you would like to learn more about Daisaku Ikeda's proposals, you can go to daisakuikeda.org for a chance to review them there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And let's move on. I have a number of questions that various folks have come up with to ask our panelists. And basically, I will read the question, and maybe if each person could very quickly respond, because we have a few questions. And by very quickly, I mean in a matter of 30 seconds or a minute. Again, time is always too short. So let me just start with the first one, and they are sometimes a little broad, but can be focused. We have some folks here who straddle the boundary between science and religion. Many of you do. We have some esteemed scientists in biology, physics, and so forth. Also, people working in more religious aspects and political aspects. Is there some shared ethic, some shared ethical viewpoint that both science and religion, who are often portrayed as enemies, that they can both agree on with respect to these weapons of mass destruction? Is there anything science and religion share in common ethically? So just let's hear from our participants.
Sure, this is Gail. I'll pipe up first. I mean, I think that there's sort of an interest in pursuing truth that is found in both. And that can be a unifying feature. What sometimes creates the problem is policy, because policy is based on science, but it's not, and it's the way where it goes to work, but it's not actually as truthful. But I think in that truth, there can be a uniting element.
Okay, very, very good. Lene, might you have something to say about this? Or Lynette? I don't.
Yeah,
are
it's
you there?
okay. Yeah, Lynette, it's fine. I think the holy scriptures of the different faiths have answers that synchronize well with scientific solutions. I think what we need to see and realize and accept is the synergy, and continue utilizing that synergy between science and religion. You know, the values that I draw from my faith help me to be a better manager of the environment, to make sound political and policy decisions. So I don't think they are very far away from each other, and we can always find that connection. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So Frank, do you have something to say? Are you there?
Yes, I think both scientists and religious people, share the understanding of what a beautiful world we live in, what a miracle it is, and I don't think everybody is uniform in what we should do to protect it, but I think there is a shared view that we have to protect the earth.
Okay, very good. And Daniel, any thoughts on this broad theme?
I would just add that I think in actual practice, we see the worlds of religion and the worlds of science working cooperatively together all the time. I know in my own experience from the standpoint of Buddhism, based on the notion of Buddha nature existing equally in all people and being the basis for respect for the dignity of all people equally, we have a sort of a humanistic orientation towards these social issues. And interestingly, we've been able to collaborate with many secular organizations, including scientific secular organizations, whether it be IPPNW, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Union of Concerned Scientists. Often they use a public health framework that uses language very similar to the humanistic values that we use normally in Buddhism. And certainly we're able to, of course, work together with other faith-based groups outside of the Buddhist tradition, often with Pax Christi and with many others, and demonstrating that there is a transcendent universal ethic that we can unite behind towards this.
Okay, that's very good. Very, very good thoughts. Let me go on to our next question that we've got. So this is sort of follows from the first one. How about, I mean, in terms of science and religion, respectively, are they in terms of stopping the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, or cutting back on their very existence? Do they have complementary kinds of strategies, or how can each pursue those goals within the political sphere? In other words, does science take people sometimes think of science as not very ethical, or they might think of religion as not very engaged in certain practical matters. So are they complementary? Can they work together? How does each one contribute to the goal of reducing or eliminating weapons of mass destruction? And we may as well go the order that we went before. So Gail, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that science and religion take different approaches to the problem. So at least as a scientist, what I find is useful is to go into the biology and talk about all the dangers that happen and all the results. So I'm using biological data to be able to influence people. So that's I think that's a different approach than you would take from a religious perspective, even though it influences how religious people might think. The dangers that people are exposed to brings on an ethical dimension, but it's that ethical dimension that appealing to something greater than ourselves, that appealing to the spiritual domain that happens much more in religion. So I think that they can be working for the same goals, but they will take different approaches.
Okay, all right. And Lene?
Yeah, I think religion is more of belief and what my conscience tells me. And on the other side, science is more facts and it's quantitative. So I think that if a religious person is thinking from, is able to be persuaded that this is the fact, and that with this data, this is the eventual result, then they will be persuaded. And I don't see anything that is in science, my personal opinion, I don't see anything in science that would not be able to get from the Holy Scriptures, whether it's the Bible or the Quran. I still feel that the Holy Scriptures of most religions do provide answers that can easily be connected with any scientific fact. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very interesting. And Frank, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, I think the religions really focus on the goal. What is the ultimate goal? And in this case, the elimination of nuclear weapons. I think the scientists then try to figure out the technical issues of achieving that goal, and in particular, on verification. How do you know? I mean, that's always the technical obstacle that people raise. How do we know that the other side will have gotten rid of all of its nuclear weapons? We can't get rid of ours until we know that they're getting rid of theirs, and so that technical people tend to look for technical challenges in achieving a goal.
Okay. All right. Very good. And Daniel, what are your thoughts on some of this?
I would just add that in Daisaku Ikeda's 2000 peace proposal, he does in a way talk about this. It's titled Humanizing Religion, Creating Peace. And the notion of humanizing religion is this idea that it's not necessarily religions per se that may be at issue, but our human tendency towards fundamentalism or dogmatism in our thinking that ought to be challenged. And I think from that standpoint, you could even look at a security theory like deterrence as a form of dogmatism, as a form of extreme fanaticism that is hard to challenge. And I think from the standpoint of religion, you can see the danger of that extreme dogmatic adherence to an abstract idea at work. And so I think it asks us to always ask the question, are we serving religion, or is religion serving us as human beings? At the same time, when scientific organizations produce studies on the catastrophic impact of even small-scale nuclear war, that's something that people of religion can't ignore. That's something of concern to them, certainly, and something that would be a motivating force to take further action to eradicate nuclear weapons from the planet.
Okay, very interesting. Very good. Let's try a question that might be a little more challenging theologically or religiously. And that's just this. We already know from the past that the gods of all the world's religions didn't intervene at Nagasaki or Hiroshima. And so would any religion expect that they would intervene in the future if there were nuclear war in the future? And given that there was no divine intervention against the use of these weapons of mass destruction or other types of weapons of mass destruction, how do faith communities respond to that, simple fact of World War II and the actual use of nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off.
Sure.
Again.
Yeah. Well,
so I think that that question makes an assumption that that's how God intervenes. How God intervenes is also through human beings, and human beings are the ones that failed to stop that event. In fact, there were many. One of the speakers mentioned the efforts that were done to stop the bombs from being dropped. Many of the people that were involved in studying the biology of what was going on in the medical exposures, they all warned against dropping it, and there was a question of even whether it was needed. But we didn't listen. Humans didn't listen, and I think even a worse concern is that we had a chance to listen and we didn't. And you know what? We haven't changed course all that much since then. And instead of learning from that experience, humanity hasn't done a good job of doing that. But we are the vehicles by which God operates, and we're not doing our jobs right.
Okay. Lene?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. As a Christian, the Bible says that my people my people perish for the lack of knowledge. So we have knowledge. God has given us free will. We also are more aware. We should be able to learn from the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that's what God provides us with knowledge, and it translates to wisdom, so that you're able to put 2 and 2 together, that if you do this, this is the result. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And Frank?
Well, I think we can learn from experience, and I think the Hiroshima and Nagasaki were lessons that are still with us. But I'm concerned that we forget also, and so there really is urgency to get on with this treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons that the Southern Hemisphere has embraced. Now we have to get the Northern Hemisphere, and I think there are indications of progress that that this moral movement can achieve something.
All right. And Daniel, your thoughts on the question?
I would just add that from the standpoint of Nichiren Buddhism, the realms of heaven and hell exist within our own lives and our own world here and now. So if we created these weapons, we can also ban them and eliminate them from the planet. And we need to be careful to not allow ourselves to become instruments and slaves to those things that we have created, and allow religion to be a disempowering force for us to exercise agency in our destiny. I think religion in this context needs to constantly, again, be reevaluated to ensure that it's serving the interests of human beings.
All right, very good. And let's ask, so the next question here, I've got a few questions. This comes from a different sort of place, but we've talked about, religion and science, faith communities and so forth. And estimates vary from 30 to nearly 40% of the world just identifies as non-religious. And that's pretty large. In fact, would be, if the non-religious were a religion, they'd be the biggest. A little paradoxical. And one might say that irreligion doesn't have the concept of holy war. It doesn't have the concepts of theologically demonizing others or saying people are going to hell or things like that, or heaven, things like that. And yet we know that atheistic regimes have committed some of the worst atrocities on earth. So how do we think about the irreligious in the in the faith science dialogue or intersection when it comes to ethical frameworks and nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction? In other words, if 30 to 40% of the world is simply irreligious, how do faith communities or the scientific community, especially since they often align with science or say they do, speak to those people and motivate them ethically to deal with this issue? Or how do you think they do deal with it? So, long question, but given that probably a large percentage of the world is that way, it seems pretty significant.
So I'll start again, I guess.
Yeah, you're the starter.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I think first of all, it's a mistake to think that just because people are atheists, that they're not good, fundamentally ethical creatures. I certainly know many people who consider themselves atheists who are among the very best people I know. And we take people who are, we don't ask before you sit on an ethics board at a hospital, do you believe in God or not? I mean, we expect people to behave ethically and correctly. And even in our country as a whole, people don't follow, I mean, most people follow laws. They don't go out and do murders and stuff like that, even if they're atheists. So I think it's a mistake to kind of equate those two. And I'll even go so far as to say, you know what, it's not just atheistic regimes that have killed a lot of people and have been horrible. I mean, you know, many Christian regimes have also been very bad. So I think we need to be careful in how we classify those things. When it comes though to dialogue and discussion, I do think that science can sometimes be a bridge between atheists and believers, because there are some common themes there that we can discuss and that will bring people together. In science religion dialogue, there are a lot of atheists.
Sure. All right, Lene?
Yeah, I think it's exploring what is common between the atheist and the religious and the scientific community. I do agree that, okay, I would not want to speak for the atheists, but I figure they lean more towards the scientific side. So it would be integral for the scientific community to reach out more to them, drawing on ethics, values, and as Professor Gale said, you know, the laws. And you're drawing on what brings us together as humanity and what will ensure that the planet stays in a sustainable way that you can be sustained. So if you're able to draw on this, I believe the atheist community would be well in the discussion.
Okay, all right. Frank?
I think Gail said it very well. I can't, you know, with regard to the morality is somehow, you know, universal, and it's not just religious people who have morality. It is others as well.
Okay. Very good. And Daniel?
I would add that in Daisaku Ikeda's 2003 peace proposal, he talks about conversation with Arnold Toynbee that he had. And Toynbee had noted that he felt that the level of technology in society had so far surpassed humanity's ethical level that he felt like the only way that humanity could avoid self-destruction is if the ethical level of the average person were elevated to that point, actually attained by the historical Buddha or by St. Francis of Assisi. It's a radical call to human development. However, I will note Daisaku Ikeda has stated that humanism is the heart of Buddhism. So it speaks to a transcendent, universal, humanistic set of ethics that go beyond sectarian limitations. All of us can engage into humanistic behavior as human beings. I think as people of faith, we draw upon it to motivate us to live out our ethics, to give us the energy and the sense of responsibility and the hope in order to live our lives that way. If you don't come from a faith tradition that offers that to you, you're still a human being and you can still draw that out, but it's each of our responsibilities to figure out what we need in order to live best as a human being.
This is very good. Good to hear from everyone. And now we've got a few questions from the audience, and I will read these questions as they are on my Q&A screen here. And I'll just ask everybody to respond again briefly to these questions. The first question comes from Anna Ikeda. What do the panelists see as the most important roles interfaith communities can play towards nuclear disarmament, and how might we work together and collaborate for tangible actions? Again, I think the key word there was probably interfaith work together.
Yeah, so I teach at Lutheran School of Theology at night, and I teach a course in religion and science, and we bring in an interfaith group of people. And it's that idea that I mentioned, which is where when you get a group of people from different perspectives talking about something outside themselves, like environment, that's one place where we have seen some progress in the interfaith community. I believe that by coming together for common dialogue, interfaith were more likely to have an impact on nuclear disarmament than almost any other way. So I think it's going to be in dialogue and discussion.
All right, and Lene?
In my experience, what we've seen interfaith do is that when you have senior religious leaders from the different faith communities showing unity on a particular cause, they are able to open doors that not even policymakers themselves can be able to open. We've seen faith leaders deliver statements or hold press conferences either at the African Union or at the national level on different issues. And that has made an issue turn around to what they've requested. So there's that solidarity, and there's also that ensuring that religious leaders are also aware of the pros and cons of a particular issue so that they're able to effectively engage with policymakers. So with education and awareness, and also pointing them in the right direction, issues are able to be handled better than any other person, I believe, in society would be able to do.
All right, very good. Frank, if we might get a word.
Yes, we have to educate our government on this. I was involved in the 1982 freeze movement, which really did educate Congress. But people, we haven't had a nuclear war in more than 75 years, and people assume, therefore, we won't have one. And therefore, we've gone back to the priorities of really what the military-industrial congressional complex. We really have to mobilize again. And people have mobilized on a very similar issue, the climate change, which we see happening. We don't see the nuclear war happening. It would come all of a sudden. And so enough of us have to get activated again to educate Congress, which has really moved on as far as this danger is concerned.
Let's get a quick remark from Daniel.
I would just add that I think strong interfaith work contributes an elevation of the human perspective, of the ethical perspective that is often given short shift in state and interstate political discourse. It's important that we not just look at these issues in terms of arms-based security strategies or economic interests, but speak to the human dimension and the ethical dimension. And I think interfaith communities can be a powerful force to making sure that that voice continues to be elevated and until it can be fully integrated into these discussions.
Okay, let me ask just in conclusion, because we have to wrap up very quickly. Could I ask everybody just to give a single sentence or so on what your concluding summary is for science and religious communities to work together and overcome the apathy and other things that are surrounding this issue? So just very quick, because we do have to wrap up.
I don't see many discussions that are being held on this today in the broad science religion dialogue community, and I believe it absolutely needs to be discussed. We need to reinvigorate that discussion.
All right, thank you. And Lene?
As a person of faith, I believe that banning nuclear weapons is really a spiritual imperative. We need to treat others as we would want to be treated, and to ensure that we protect the sanctity of humanity and human life, and protect our planet. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And Frank, a concluding remark?
Well, there was a saying, better active today rather than radioactive tomorrow.
Yes. All right. And Daniel, a quick sentence in conclusion.
I would just add a quote from Daisaku Ikeda: "A great human revolution in the life of a single individual can affect a change in the destiny of society and the destiny of all humankind." And that applies equally in the realm of faith and in the realm of science.
All right. Thank you very much. And I don't know if there are any other questions, or I see a message from Elizabeth that says we're going to 5 p.m. now. Are we? I have two conflicting messages in my message.
Eric, I'm jumping on. I'm sorry if I've contributed to any conclusion. We do have, I think, about 10 minutes. And I think there were a couple of other questions in the chat. And if we can just at least get to one or two of them, I think that would be great.
Okay, well, that's, yeah.
I think one of the questions in the chat concerned other types of WMDs beyond nuclear weapons. And I think if we can, ask the panelists maybe to close with that.
Yeah, all right.
That human beings have unfortunately developed ever more sophisticated mechanisms for destroying all humanity and the entire created order. And so if we're talking about chemical and biological weapons, or if we're talking about the increasing significance of AI in the development of WMDs, I wonder if you could tell us, if the panelists could share with us your experience with both the scientific community and the faith community, or the pluralities within, when it comes to thinking about the ethical questions and then the policy actions that need to be addressed in order to prevent the proliferation of these ever, greater forms of destruction. I think that was the main question that we wanted to throw out before we closed.
Yeah,
Little
so
expansion, yeah.
I'll sort of start. I mean, I deal with a little bit, I talk with people that do biological weapons, and the problem is when there's new technology development, scientists don't actually often feel like that's likely to be used for negative purposes. And it's going to be, companies, industry, Department of Defense that pops in and says, oh, look, we can use this for whatever purpose. So for instance, somebody developed a method to put a chip in the brain to help people that are paralyzed be able to work a computer screen. But the military took it and they say, now we can use this to, like, with thoughts, drop a bomb on a different area. There's a disconnect between what it happens in the lab and then how that technology is used. And I think we need to have more stopping points in how we think through those issues in order to help ourselves deal with that. It's the same with even new drugs, like cognitive drugs that make people think better. That have learning disabilities, for instance, they make for quicker thinking on the battlefield too.
All right, Lene, thoughts about these other weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, or technological?
Yeah, I think in terms of technological, maybe I can speak a little bit towards killer robots, which I'm not very active, but I've just read a little bit about. And, this is really about how much control, how much human control can we give a machine? Will it be able to distinguish, between what is right and what is wrong? As human beings, we're already plagued by such decisions. So how would we be able to give that to a machine to be able to figure that this particular person is undertaking an assignment that would particularly harm a group of people, or is just going about everyday life? So I think for me, in terms of technology, it's a space that we need to think about, and also for the religious community to get into. And the fact that we've not seen a catastrophe so far that has been brought on by killer robots doesn't mean that it's not going to come. I mean, the science already shows that the potential for threat to human life and human dignity is already going to be a problem. Yeah.
All right. Yes, right. The artificial intelligence too. We've got a lot in the mix. Frank, we could get a comment on this larger topic.
Well, I mean, it has to do with the two-phased character of technology. You can use it for good or for evil. And you know, sometimes I wish you could slow down the advance of technology so we could manage it better. But we do need, and the larger community can intervene here. We do need more focus on community control over technology, and the kinds of panels that Gail was talking about, especially on human subjects, ethics with human subjects, and less focus on the individual glory of breakthroughs. We do need to educate scientists, I think, that they have community responsibilities. That has to be part of the education, a bigger part of the education of scientists.
All right, and Daniel, what are your
my thoughts on that? I think amongst decision makers, especially high-level decision makers, is that I think this pandemic taught us that in a very clear way that things that are difficult to imagine do happen. And we have to be able to imagine those things happening and be able to take appropriate action accordingly. We have to listen to scientists when they tell us that we are putting ourselves at grave risk by continuing to have nuclear weapons as part of security strategies. And when we look at the dangers of chemical and biological weapons, cluster munitions, and others, they demonstrate that we do have the capacity to exercise self-restraint and change course and learn and evolve to move in a safer direction. At the same time, amongst the general population, I think we have to do a better job at making sure human rights education is a part of our culture, because policies are only going to be effective to the extent that they're supported by their citizens. And we need to make sure that civil society has the education and the ability to influence decision makers to make sure that their interests are always being served in their security strategies.
All right, very good comments from everybody on these larger issues. And I think that will basically wrap us up for this. And those are all great answers to and great speeches on this topic, which is certainly a relevant topic. I mean, I knew its relevance back when I was a kid in the Cold War, and here we are today, and it still hasn't been resolved. So thanks to everyone for participating, and I will turn it over to the technical controllers here.
Thank you, Dr. Steinhardt, for the intellectually stimulating discussion, and for all the panelists to join us and give their perspectives, practitioners' perspectives and academicians' perspectives on this contemporary and very relevant issue. Now, I would like to turn to our professor, Elizabeth, who's also the faculty director of our club, to just deliver the thank you remarks and the closing remarks for our conference for the day. Thank you.